A lot of people have been asking, what is white guilt? Put simply, white guilt is white people apologizing for something they never did and are never satisfied until they become the loser or the minority. And maybe not even till then. See, white guilt, it's like a phobia. It's not rational. So it doesn't matter to the person if the otherwise legitimate reason, if there was one, has been taken care of or fulfilled. And that's kind of the problem. When I'm talking about white guilt, I'm not just talking about liberalism, egalitarianism, and their ways of promoting anti-racism, reverse racism. The hilarious or sad thing is when complete anti-liberals are using white guilt and anti-racism or reverse racism to win people over. Now, some may say that's just politics. When you're playing politics, you'll say things you disagree with just to win over your opponents, and that may well be true. But think about it. Is white guilt, anti-racism, and reverse racism limited to liberals? Or is it pervasive to everybody? Or are people on the other side, we're talking about conservatives, creationists, gun rights advocates, capitalists, anti-abortion, pro-lifers, are they only using that to win people politically and they're actually otherwise racist? Let's see. If you were a creationist, how do you win people over? The quickest way to press a partisan button is by associating evolution with what? Racism. See, evolution is bad because racism is bad because Hitler accepted evolution. Therefore, evolution is racist. We're done. Now, if you were pro-immigration, how do you use white guilt or anti-racism or reverse racism to win people over? Easy. You see, people who are pro-immigrant, they want to import cheap labor. So that amounts to slavery. So I'm a good guy because I don't want slavery. I would prefer people to have no jobs at all in their country. Yeah, this might normally make no sense, but you got the hot button, which is calling your opponent a racist or a slave owner or a slavery advocate. That's white guilt in play. Because you either know that that's the hot button issue for liberals, or you know that our society is so pervasive in white guilt that that's the only thing people ever care about. If you're a gun rights advocate, how do you condemn your opponent? By telling them that gun control were started out or intended as being racist. That was meant to keep the black man down. If you're pro-life, this is easy. Just tell people that abortion is the white racist guy's way of genociding blacks. That's how you get blacks and liberals to get on your pro-life side. If you're capitalist, how do you do it? Well, tell people taxation, socialism, hurt minorities. Doesn't matter if it's true, just as long as you say it and as long as people believe it. See, it doesn't matter anymore whether gun rights, abortion, creationism, evolution, capitalism really hurts anybody. But the number one model for winning people politically and ideologically is to tell people that your opponent is a bad guy. And what's the best way to do that? Tell them they are racist. Is there any doubt that Godwin's law is based on calling people Hitler or Nazi? See, it's not calling people Marxist. It's not calling people communist. Calling people Mao or Stalin. That doesn't seem to hurt people as much. Calling people Charlie Manson or Ted Bundy or whatever psychopath you could think of doesn't seem to be that bad. But God forbid, if you drop the word racist, genocide, you got that person. They are speechless. Because nobody, whether they believe it or not, is going to be in their right mind and say, okay, yeah, I'm a racist, so what's your point? They'll deny it. They will do everything they can to deny that they are racist because they've already agreed with you that racism is completely unacceptable. That's white guilt. Is that in our society today, racism, even as a thought crime, seems to be a worse crime than murder, rape, child molestation, and white-collar robbery. I'm willing to bet that most of you out there can see yourself being friends with somebody who's a white-collar embezzler, a murderer, a rapist, a child molester, before you will even consider being friendly to somebody who admits to being racist. So now I'm just going to talk about different ways that liberalism manifests or expresses white guilt. White guilt is when you have a double standard for white people, mostly because you're white. White guilt is when you say you believe in equality, but you know you don't. That's why you hold white people to a different standard. White guilt is when diversity only works one way. You see, you will always complain when there's too many white people somewhere, but you will never say that there's not enough diversity when there's too many blacks or too many Mexicans. Unless then you're talking about, well, there's not enough white or educated or well-behaving people in that area, and therefore it's undesirable, crime-ridden. You have a really smart way of masking what you really want to say. You have a very clever way of disguising negative connotations when you don't want to even hint that perhaps facts are racist. Perhaps inequality is reality. That's white guilt. This is different than if you had an employer or you had people who controlled your paycheck or could kick your ass if you offend them. We're talking about people who have no control over you, and you're still afraid of offending them. White guilt is when you're very comfortable bashing Islam, Scientology, Christianity, Catholicism, Buddhism, but black religions get a free pass. Rastafari, Kwanzaa, Santeria, Nation of Islam, Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, I can see the rationale there. I can see there might be a reason that is so. Perhaps they're very small religions. They're not influential. They're not dangerous. They're just kind of nice to look at and laugh at. They're not threatening. So you don't worry about them as much as you do on Islam and Catholicism. That's quite understandable. So let's talk about something that has one religion and underneath that two ethnic groups. See, you don't seem to have a problem laughing at Irish for what they are. All they do is drink beer and pop out babies. But you're not going to say that about Mexicans. You know it's true. It's probably because of their religion. But why is it fair game to say what Irish are, but not what Mexicans are? Even if you believe it. Now, if you don't believe it, great. But if you believe it, why are you afraid to say it? White guilt is when people like Ray Comfort love to tell Muslims and atheists, or probably sometimes even Catholics, how wrong they are about their religion. But you know who gets the free pass? Jews. White guilt is when immigration is good for the United States, but bad for Europe. Because we've seen what Muslims have done to Europe. White guilt is when YouTube atheists have their field day drawing Muhammad, but God forbid if somebody like Pat Condell stands up and condemns them politically. White guilt is when outsourcing is bad and immigration is good, knowing that it does the same thing, kills jobs. White guilt is when, if you were forced to choose between all political ideologies possible, dictatorship, communism, anarchism are all preferable to anything that is racist. You pick your political or religious ideologies based on what's the least racist, White guilt is quite simply a form of denial, dishonesty. It leads people to say things they don't mean or they can't practice. White guilt is when people who defend the Constitution or want to bring back the glory of our founding fathers will either deny that our founding fathers allowed and condoned slavery or denounce our founding fathers outright. You will just not hear anybody tell you that our founding fathers were good because they were slave owners or because they were okay with racism. What you will hear was they were good people, but they were racist. Or they were good people because they were anti-racist, or they hated slave ownership. This is the denial and disconnect, where you would have to lie to yourself about history because you're afraid that the facts might not sound very good, even if it is no fault of your own. Why are you apologizing for what our founding fathers did? Why are you apologizing for what the Bible wrote? Why can't you just admit that life is less than perfect, you are less than perfect, and society is less than perfect, and people are just not equal? Why is that such a hard thing to admit? And that's white guilt, folks. White guilt is not limited to liberals. White guilt is when people who are not liberal and don't believe in equality still use race as a bait to get their support, either because it is the most hot button issue or because they believe it, which is kind of the same thing.